Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for this event, Capture the Red Flag, an inside look into China's hacking contest ecosystem. I'm Melanie Hart, the Senior Director of the Global China Hub here at the Atlantic Council. We have a great group of China experts here that are doing really cutting edge work, as they'll be demonstrating today, tracking what Beijing is doing at home and abroad and working to devise allied solutions to the global challenges posed by China's rise. In the cyberspace in particular, China has developed a robust cybersecurity ecosystem that enables and supports their foreign policy ambitions. Most recently, as many of you are probably aware, Chinese state-sponsored threat groups such as Volt Typhoon and Salt Typhoon have infiltrated U.S. critical infrastructure networks and pre-positioned them in some of those networks, including our major internet service providers. These state-sponsored cyber intrusions are part of China's growing cyber escalation toward the United States that compromises assets vital to our national security and also endangers ordinary Americans when we face the risk that critical systems could go offline. In addition to hacking American infrastructure, these same state-sponsored threat groups have targeted many of our allies, including European policymakers. China's ability to orchestrate these attacks stems from the network that the Chinese government is building up of black hat hackers. To recruit top talent into this cybersecurity ecosystem, the Chinese government sponsors capture the flag competitions to help them identify and recruit the talented individuals and to train them to target the United States and others. Today, we are very lucky to have our report authors, Eugenio Benicasa and Global China Hub fellow Dakota Carey, as well as a group of expert panelists to discuss these hacking competitions, how that empowers Beijing to target the United States and our allies, and what lessons we need to learn from how and why they are doing this so effectively. I really want to commend the report co-authors. At this time, it is increasingly hard to do primary source research on China, how the Chinese government is orchestrating its foreign policy and national security. And the way that this report uses open source information to map out hacking competitions from original Mandarin language sources, I think is a gold standard that we really will be looking to do more of across the Atlantic Council. And I think serves a great example of what we can still do, even when it's hard to access information inside of the Chinese ecosystem. I am thrilled to introduce our keynote speaker for today's event, Jessica Ruzek. We are so lucky to have Jessica here. Jessica is the Deputy Associate Chief of Policy at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA. That agency she's responsible for ensuring that CISA's equities and priorities are represented in U.S. government initiatives related to defending our critical infrastructure, handling nation-state attacks, ransomware, and trade and economic security issues. Before joining CISA, Jessica worked for the U.S. Department of Treasury's CFIUS, or Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States office, where she helped assess pending foreign direct investments in the United States to gauge potential national security risks. She's also worked for the Conference of State Bank Supervisors, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Transportation, and the Securities and Exchange Commission on a variety of cybersecurity policy and risk management roles. We are very lucky to have Jessica here. She's exactly the right policymaker to hear from on this issue. So Jessica, take it away.
Thank you so much. Apologies to those of you that are hoping to hear me talk about assorted typhoons, but I am actually going to take a step back and speak a little bit for just a few minutes on kind of the broader strategic ecosystem that I think got us here. So in recent years, we've seen a shift in PRC malicious cyber activity against the United States. Whereas before, the PRC activities were a little bit more overt and purposeful, they've slowly shifted towards crime of opportunity, positioning themselves on networks, critical infrastructure, and waiting for an opportunity to leverage insights collected in the interim. This is obviously concerning. One, we call it critical for a reason. We don't want anyone lurking in our critical infrastructure. Two, such a change makes it harder to identify possible victims as well as to predict and mitigate activities. Responding to a change in tactics, techniques, and procedures is like taking the same route to work every day for years. You have no situational awareness, and all of a sudden, you have to take an alternate route. The vast US government bureaucracy is really just not set up to adapt so quickly. And the third reason this is so concerning is that it's making us realize, since it's been a while since we, meaning the US government as a whole, have paid sufficient attention to operational technology security. But that's a whole different discussion. That said, the good news for all of us in the United States, and our allies at least, is that CISA and its partners know what to do. We know how to mitigate, we know how to respond to incidents, and we have those pieces handled pretty well. So once identified, we can evict these malicious actors from our networks, take steps to prevent future attacks, and boost the cyber defenses of CI owners and operators. At CISA, initiatives like Secure by Design help to strengthen the security posture of software manufacturers and their customers. And CISA also offers a variety of tools to help companies improve their cyber hygiene. There's a breadth and depth of expertise across the US government and our private sector partners to help us respond. The more important question and pertinent question, I think, is how was the PRC able to pull such a change off? Reading Dakota and Eugenio's report really helped me extrapolate and clarify a few thoughts that I've been kicking around for a while. So I'm going to share them with you now, maybe go off on a few tangents, and we'll see where we end up. So this will be fun for all of us. So what's driving PRC activity in cyberspace? How have they been so successful? So the PRC has been incredibly strategic about its focus on emerging technologies in a way that I don't think a lot of policymakers recognize, or so-called China watchers recognize. And this includes cyber. So she decided that China was going to become elite and then made sure that China had the right legal infrastructure and policy guidance in place to make that happen. That's no small thing. Laws like their data security law, as well as the CCP's public 5-year plans, make it clear exactly where their focus lies. So not only does she make this a priority, but then the infrastructure is in place for that message to permeate throughout all 75,000 levels of CCP bureaucracy and into the quote unquote private sector. So one, China has the right political climate to make this concerted effort and skills development happen, and they give themselves the time to do it. She played the long game here. This is not new. We saw this coming, right? I think we're finally just seeing some of the results, and yet somehow it's still surprising. So then, two, they back it up with money. The PRC can throw so much money at developing their cyber capacity in a way that the United States just cannot. It just doesn't work the same way in a rules-based democracy that it does in the PRC. And this money is clearly having tangible results. For example, increased state funding for R&D, plus the change in national security climate in the United States, I must say, has significantly reduced the amount of brain drain from China, which was previously a key problem for the CCP, and I think an area where the United States government was really benefiting. And this is something that warrants much further, I think, analysis by people much smarter than I. So one, she says something's a priority and then has the authority to back it up. And two, that priority is backed up by additional state funding, which leads me to point three, which is that these efforts are very purposefully situated within a broader strategic ecosystem. The PRC did not suddenly decide, hey, hacking sounds cool, let's be good at that. It's because that capability provides advantages and information necessary to achieving their greater strategic aims. As a side note, malicious activity is malicious activity, and I'm absolutely not denying that the PRC poses a critical cyber espionage threat to the US and private sector networks. But I also think there's part of it, like the PRC has been blocked from its normal route of IP theft through US government and allied partnerships and priorities like export controls, investment screening. And so it's difficult for the PRC to acquire the technology that it used to get just through outright overt theft. And so now it's turned to cyber means. So I do think there's a certain degree to which this is just how China does tech transfer now. That doesn't mean it's not a problem, but I do think that's maybe a useful framing for anyone who's about to have a panic attack over all of this, the way I know many of my friends and colleagues often are. So I recognize that I'm generalizing, but Chinese education focuses very heavily on STEM rather than liberal arts. I think probably not a surprise to anyone who's dialing into this event today. So from an early age, you have a massive population learning about hard sciences, cybersecurity, and technologies that many US students are not exposed to until college, if ever. And maybe some of those students continue on to a top-tier Chinese university, but many don't. Yet because of their early childhood education, they can continue to noodle about, develop their own skills. And as today's research shows, maybe they get pulled into a state-sponsored competition and suddenly they get more and more training and job opportunities. They feed that back into the pipeline and. The entire system is set up to make this happen because the system is the state. So the structure is purposeful. You find promising resources, develop their talents, leverage those talents, and then connect all the dots. And it just begins so early and continues so comprehensively. And this leads to an environment in which the PRC is collecting real-time information about threats and vulnerabilities and can thus adapt their TTPs accordingly. This is a full-on supply chain, and I think we need to start thinking about it as such. So what can we do? What is stopping the United States from developing the same capacities and capabilities? Well, one, we're already doing some of it. The Office of the National Cyber Director has a 60-page strategy for bolstering the US cyber workforce, and it includes goals like making cyber education more open source and available, and facilitating applied or experiential learning, a la China's hacking competitions. In the interest of keeping these remarks shorter than they would otherwise be, I'm not going to elaborate too much here, but it was really interesting report, and I encourage you all to go check it out on the ONCD website or the White House website. I think where we differ from the PRC is primarily in this ecosystem concept. China's mentality is that they are building something structural, and the US mentality is that we are trying to solve a problem that's right in front of us. The US government as a whole is not set up for long-term strategic thinking. That's just not the way that term limits and terms work, right? And we have a tendency to view policy issues in a silo rather than taking a step backwards and seeing how all the pieces are connected. Frankly, the time to establish a foundational strategy for countering PRC malicious cyber activity was 20 years ago. For this reason, I spend a lot of my time having waking nightmares and about what tomorrow's problems will be. So if you have thoughts about what we will care about in 2050, let me know. Let's solve them together. China can do what it does because of its civil military fusion, which is pretty fundamentally at odds with US core values. So I don't see that changing anytime soon. We cannot just copy and paste what the PRC is doing. We very purposefully have guardrails between the public and private sector in the United States and in most real democracies. The nature of capitalism is that the private sector drives innovation. We want an open economy. There's so many brilliant US companies pursuing next-gen issues, including those in the cybersecurity field, but it's exceedingly difficult, if not impossible, to convince policymakers and voters to prioritize the issues of tomorrow when there are very real problems to address today. I think the one true advantage the United States has, and it really can't be overstated, is our global network of partnerships. We do not operate alone on anything. We work with our close partners to achieve numerous policy outcomes, including those that counter malicious PRC and other cyber activity. And I think there's room for the USG to work even more closely with our allies and partners in the private sector to fund capacity building programs, exchange information, and develop solutions. But this requires correcting the often uneven exchange of information between industry and government. Right now, I don't think I'll surprise anyone when I say that we tend to describe information sharing partnerships as, okay, you private sector, give us government the information, the end. Thank you for this equal collaboration. So it's a definite mindset shift that's required there, but it's still a promising path forward. And I'll say this is actually the goal of CIS's Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, which was established a few years ago to facilitate greater information exchanging among public and private sector stakeholders. So that was a lot of words to basically describe two concepts. One, China is perhaps uniquely set up to do what it's doing, and it's doing it effectively. And two, there are things the United States can do and is already doing to compete. It will require a shift in the way we think about problems and priorities, as well as some creative funding. So maybe Elon Musk can use his $12 billion windfall to help us out there. But I do think we'll get there, as long as we consider this a long-term initiative. And I'm looking forward to hearing from the panel today about how they think we can make this happen. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Great, Jessica, thank you so much. One big takeaway I have from your remarks is that we need to work on breaking down silos on the US side, silos between, as you put it, the deep experts on China and the deep experts on cybersecurity. And then on the practitioner side, between the US government experts and those in the private sector. So I'm glad at least this panel does break down silos in both regards. Thank you for joining us from your public sector perch. And I'll now turn it over to Didi Kristen Tatlow, our moderator and one of the absolute best deep China experts that I know. Dee Dee is a non-resident senior fellow here in the Atlantic Council Global China Hub and a senior reporter at Newsweek, where she covers international affairs. She was born and raised in Hong Kong, and she spent 39 years there and in Beijing and Taiwan, including as a journalist for the Eastern Express, the Associated Press, the South China Morning Post, and the New York Times. She's worked in German media as well, and she was a senior fellow for Asia at the German Council on Foreign Relations and a senior non-resident fellow at Project Synopsis in Prague. She has won many prizes for her work, and in 2021 co-published a book, China's Quest for Foreign Technology Beyond Espionage. Today, she lives in Germany with her family. Dee Dee, thanks so much for joining us. Over to you.
Okay, and thank you very much indeed, Melanie, for that very warm introduction, and Jessica for those really pertinent comments that I think point very much towards the need for solutions here, which I think is absolutely critical, and was also, I think, one thing that I'd like to ask our speakers to focus on as we move through the moderated discussion. So I'd also like to ask people who are attending to put your questions onto askac.org so that we can get into that towards the end of our moderated part. And, you know, in the spirit of what we were just talking about with not just solutions, but also how to merge or change a little bit, sort of tweak at the ways that we think and operate to deal with these challenges in democracies, I would like to just point out just how amazing I really thought this report was, because it as a journalist, it speaks to me very strongly. It is indeed very much on the ground, almost an area studies report, and done really through Chinese sources, which is absolutely vital. As a journalist, I know just how important that is to go straight to the sources, primary sources. And I found it's a gripping report, and it's about an absolutely critical issue. I think that's obvious to all of us. So big congratulations to the authors. And Dakota, I thought I would start with you. It's a big landscape and a detailed one that you're describing. Could you a little bit explain or talk through for everyone what we're looking at and what are your sort of key ideas about what this all means? But initially, just what are we looking at here?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're looking at is almost like a happenstance and happy accident that Eugenio's previous research and my interests collided. Eugenio published this paper called From Vegas to Chengdu earlier this year that hits on hacking competitions focused at exploit development or 0 days in software, right? And his work very detailed tracks organizations, institutions, and individuals participating in developing this ecosystem. And it was in the process of discussing that paper that Eugenio and I came to the conclusion that we were already putting together a data set, and something similar had to be done for the rest of this hacking competition ecosystem. The report itself details a good number of data points associated with that ecosystem. So we compiled our sourcing from websites that track hacking competitions, mainly in China, although some were international sources of similar data sets. And we spent a great deal of time trying to disambiguate the names of competitions, preliminaries versus finals, total participant numbers, write-ups from participants. And we condensed it down to both the report and then a subsequent dashboard where users can go through and view detailed information about individual competitions that are annually recurring. And so if you are interested in any of the competitions discussed in the report or any of the other 54 or so that we developed these placards for, you can view that information through that website. We try to compile kind of a composite picture for this ecosystem since effectively 2014. We find that, across China, excluding university-specific competitions, so ones that were held by a university for their own students, because those would be far too numerous to include, as well as the number of competitions held by the private sector specifically for job recruitment. For example, Google CTF. We excluded competitions like that. We still came up with a number around 120 or so competitions, about 56 of which have recurred annually in that 10-year period at least one time. I won't step on Eugenio's toes about what the report covers in terms of composite details, but we do have sections in there for competitions that have notable relationships with the security services and provide a really good example of how this CTF ecosystem is also part of a broader talent identification and recruiting pipeline.
Right. You know, and Eugenio, could I just move to you now and, you know, to address some of that detail and also what was the process for you of compiling this report? It is very difficult, and it's becoming increasingly difficult, of course, to access solid information, whether you're inside China or outside China. And I know that for many years there, it's not easier inside China. In fact, very briefly, I was telling Dakota and Eugenio that I think back in 2016, when I was still in Beijing, I came across a hacking competition event at a very large hotel in Beijing. And I was completely, you know, fascinated, of course. What was this? I'd never seen this before. I didn't realize this was happening there. And, you know, I tried to go in and I was told by a whole bevy of female organizers that foreigners were not allowed. No, stay out. So there you go. That's what it's like to be a journalist. And I think in this case, it's what it's like to be a researcher too, right? Eugenio, could you talk about the process?
Yeah, absolutely. As Dakota mentioned, this is for me has been the continuum or the next phase of our first research project that I focused mostly on exploit contests, as well as in particular the participation of Chinese talented elite, so-called elite hackers in international contests, in particular looking at DEF CON taking place in Vegas and then Own to Own in Vancouver, Canada. And as I could have said, we collected a lot of data on this, but the report, I would say, is divided mostly in two parts. So the first is analyzes the main factors driving its growth, the milestone reached with China's hacking community, the prominent hosting organizations, as well as specific case studies on state-sponsored competitions. But I also want to take a chance here just to define as well what we're looking at, because I just have the feel that sometimes it's not necessarily well understood. So we're looking at hacking contests that, broadly speaking, are organized events where participants have to solve security-related challenges to demonstrate and enhance their technical skills. They can include different tasks. So as we said, exploiting vulnerabilities is one of them. But it can also include reverse engineering, cryptography, and more. And in really what is a discrete realm like cybersecurity, these competitions are very useful and practical ways to display someone's talents on a local, national, or global stage. And there are usually two main types of competitions. As we mentioned, one is exploit contests that they focus on identifying and exploiting vulnerabilities in real computer software or systems, while CTF are simulated cybersecurity challenges. And they're designed to test participants' abilities to think critically, creatively, and quickly in simulated cybersecurity scenarios. And this is what our report focuses on. And something that we, as Dakota already mentioned, we analyzed over 500 competition rounds, and something from between 2004 and around 2023, including more recent ones. And something striking that we found is that between 2004 and 2013, there were only a handful of competitions. And I think here it's also important to mention what just took place these developments before hacking competitions are increasing. Let's just look at the geopolitical context. If we remember, 2010 was the year of Stuxnet, right? And then 2013 there was the year of the Snowden leaks. At the same time, there was around the time when both U.S. political figures started putting more pressure on China to stop its IP theft activities, and also private companies exposing not only APTs, but also individuals within these APTs. For example, the Mandiant and CrowdStrike reports, then Xi Jinping coming into power in 2013 and declaring that China had to become a powerhouse, a cyber powerhouse in 2014. I think it's important to mention that despite these geopolitical dynamics and evolution of these events, China's hacking community grew still very much organically, and we saw by looking at our data that this became pretty evident around 2013. And this is when Chinese hacking teams started achieving remarkable successes at international competitions, such as, for example, DEF CON CTF. Here we have a team from Tsinghua University's called the Blue Lotus. It was the first Chinese team to ever reach the finals of DEF CON CTF in 2013. And since then we've seen 1 to 4 Chinese teams reaching the finals pretty much every year until including this year. And this is important, not only because of the geopolitical dynamics that we mentioned, but also because before this, there was a big taboo against hackers, not only in China, but globally. And this success abroad really helped breaking this taboo in China. And you start seeing also big companies that start getting involved. They start buying out teams and sponsoring competitions. But more importantly, these successful teams start funding their own cybersecurity startups with very offensive niche cyber capabilities. But they also start establishing their own CTF contests, including attack defense ones, where there are realistic combat scenarios involved. These are some of the most prestigious globally, and this is exactly the ecosystem that we looked at in this report. And some of the things.
Can I just leap in there, because while you talk about attack, etc.,
Yeah.
could you just talk a little bit about the balance between offensive and defensive capabilities that you saw in your assessment, your analysis of all the contests that are taking place in China right now, or have been for years?
Yeah, so in terms, if you mean about a comparison between, for example, what happens in China, what happens, for example, in the West, there are definitely. So I think first it's important to just have a clear breakdown of CTFs into what is called usually Jeopardy style, where participants solve a series of independent challenges across different categories, like, for example, cryptography, reverse engineering, and so on, for competing to complete these challenges within a time limit. And it's basically a puzzle-based issue where they have to use their problem-solving skills to earn points. And yeah. And then we have attack defense CTFs, where this is a more of an attack defense. Teams have attack defense, offensive and defensive roles, and they have to defend their own vulnerable systems to attack, while at the same time attacking others. And this competition is more dynamic and interactive, that requires real-time defense tactics and offensive strategies by participants. And we in the analysis of China's offensive ecosystem, we definitely see a large number of these type of contests, whereas in the West, usually these tend to be less prevalent, both across the US and Europe. So this is definitely something that that stands out in this context, but not only with regard to the format of the contest, but also specifically, for example, to their focus. Yes.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm asking that also because there's a question right here that DEF CON's been mentioned already.
Mhm.
Question is, how are the Chinese competitions different from, say, DEF CON over in Vegas every year? You see US military and intel set up shop there to recruit people too. I wonder if you could comment on that.
Yeah. So DEF CON is a great example of an attack defense contest, well, at least the final rounds of the competition, whereas the qualification rounds follow a Jeopardy, so the more the puzzle based format. So again here the comparison being whereas these contests are not as prevalent and widespread in Western contests they are at least according to the data that we captured, they are much more prevalent in China, and this of course has a lot of advantages when it comes to recruitment in general, the offensive capabilities pipeline. Yeah.
So it's a scale issue as well, isn't it? That there's simply so much of it going on from what we can tell, as you say, and we can't see everything can we? Dakota, just briefly back to you. We can't see happening. Did you guys get a sense of how, because this is out in the public sphere? I'm sure there's some kinds of analysis and information gathering going on in classified spheres, but as Jessica said earlier, how do we kind of share these better, more, and spread awareness in the public sphere as well? So I was wondering if you could talk about how much do you think you weren't able to catch? I know it's hard to prove a negative, but that would be, maybe you have an instinct about that.
Yeah, I think the answering the negative is difficult, but it is easy to see kind of the trend line about where and what type of data is accessible and less accessible over time. And so I think as we got closer to current date, we could see a kind of a drop off in the number of competitions for which there was very specific information about attendees or the purpose and kind of format of the competition, right? And so as you get closer to current, as Xi Jinping cracks down on the amount of data accessible to foreigners, it becomes kind of clear as you're collecting information on these competitions that they are starting to dial back information that had previously been made public, such as write-ups about the competitions, et cetera. Yeah, so over time, the trend is away from publishing as widely as they have previously, but there is still a good bit of information available.
Right, that's of course a huge challenge for everyone, I guess, as well as we're trying to build awareness of this ecosystem in China. The fact that it's disappearing as we talk is probably well, it's just a challenge. I wanted to move on to Devin now, and Devin, of course, I realize greatly to my chagrin that I didn't actually formally introduce you. Eugenio, of course, is a senior researcher at the Cyber Defense Project at the Center for Security Studies in the ETH in Zurich in Switzerland. Dakota, of course, is a non-resident fellow at the Global China Hub and at Sentinel-1, the Global China Hub of the Atlantic Council. Devin Thorne, Principal Threat Intelligence Analyst for China Geopolitics at Recorded Future. And last, absolutely not least, Anastasia Webster, aka Stacy, I understand, the Academic Engagement Branch of the Stakeholder Engagement Division of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA. So that's your formal designations. Thank you very much for that. And sorry that I neglected that earlier. Devin, I wanted to switch to you because you've got sort of your thing is sort of the geopolitical bigger picture, right? And clearly, do you see, is this very much a China doing it alone kind of effort, or are they connecting to ecosystems in Russia, for example, maybe even North Korea, who knows, Iran? I'm sure it's an issue that, we probably don't know enough about it, but particularly, I guess, with China, Russia, I'm wondering how much interface there might be on these types of hacking ecosystems.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. I think you touched on it somewhat, right? It's an area deserving of more study, right? China and Russia clearly growing closer together, including on, technological research and things. I don't think I've personally seen evidence of collaboration in like these kinds of CTF competitions. Or necessarily close collaboration in sort of cyberspace operations either, though of course Dakota or Eugenio, if you've seen those, I'd be very interested. So I think it's an area that's worth studying. But like big picture, I think what China is trying to do here is add elements to its kind of, as Jessica was saying, whole of society approach to developing this capability so that it is available in the future should China need it, whether that's to defend China's networks from an attack at home, or as they obviously are doing, to launch attacks overseas. And the competitions are just one aspect of that. I know Dakota has previous research on the sponsorship of cyber ranges. There's obviously the big vulnerability regulations that came out a couple of years ago as well. But even going beyond that, right, PLA, the MSS, and others, they also have in-house technical research institutes that are contributing to the tools that are available for China. Academic institutions are also contributors, and then of course businesses that are offering some of the services that have been mentioned. And so, if you try to dig into each of those buckets together, we might find some linkages with Russia. I'm just not so sure about current state of play.
Yeah. One issue that I wanted to ask you as well is in terms of sort of national defense mobilization issues, do we see this cyber getting into is this part of that too? Is there a sense that they're trying to keep the population because they're very large. These contests are just huge, aren't they? I mean, some of them are. There's one, I think it was the Ministry of Public Security contest that has had 35,000 participants. Now that's a massive number, and of course it reflects China's scale, and it's just always a challenge. So is it a sense that it's a sector, like a population-wide push just to general broad education as part of somehow national mobilization or national defense thinking, or is that not the connection we should be looking at?
I think that that's one angle to consider, right? That might not account for the entire picture, but for instance, when you look at how the PLA talks about capabilities it's going to need in the future, it identifies the importance of cyber domain capabilities. And when they talk about, okay, well, how do we ensure that we're going to have those capabilities? They put a lot of emphasis on military civil fusion, as Jessica mentioned, and sort of integrating the development of things that'll be useful for the military with things that'll be useful for the economy. And that strand of thinking is core to the entire national defense mobilization system and mindset. So I think it's an important angle. It doesn't necessarily cover everything and get into some definitional issues about what is technically national defense mobilization system and what's not. But it is a good framework, I think, for understanding what is happening. And, they've identified hundreds of competitions and, dozens of agencies that are involved in sponsoring these things. And that too is sort of reflective of, I think it's reflective of China's mobilization sort of style, campaign style rollout of policies. Cybersecurity has been identified as something to do. Everyone's kind of jumping in. And so you get it spread throughout society. And I think it's going to have the effects that they're looking for, but it also might lead to some waste in terms of overlapping missions and number of people that are involved. So I think good questions all around.
Yeah, because the one of the approaches in China, of course, is that you, for example, you set up a lot of companies and then you kind of duke it out and who's the strongest, survival of the fittest, that kind of thing. I mean, is it the same thing here? I don't know who might want to take this, but are we seeing so many contests because they're basically trying, it's like a gladiator ring, and they're trying to kind of make sure that between not just the actual work that's being done, but that the companies themselves or the contests themselves are, well, they're mutually learning and they're getting better and better all the time, right? I wonder if Eugenio or Dakota would like to take that. It's a more specific question.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the clearest answer is that the policy that kind of sets this up that's announced in 2018 is encouraging all relevant ministries to support the development of kind of a healthy hacking competition ecosystem. And so if you look at the table in the report that kind of identifies which ministries are supporting how many competitions with the average number of annual attendees, et cetera, what you see is, kind of to Devin's point, a lot of waste. There are ministries that are effectively in direct competition with one another, hosting simultaneous and overlapping competitions with the same jurisdiction, all competing effectively for the same talent pool. And I think, the way a lot of the times that we can frame and think about China's activities is that they don't necessarily care about efficiency, but they do care about results. And so if the political signal is to support the development of this ecosystem, and you are a relevant ministry, then it's absolutely pertinent for you to establish your own hacking competition, your own talent pipelines, et cetera, even if from our, more market-driven, efficiency-minded perspective, we would say, okay, maybe we should do this in a different way. I think that, yeah, that those are my thoughts on that. I think Anastasia might have more to offer on how the U.S. ecosystem at least is designed, and the way that we see that it operates separate and differently, definitely in kind from the Chinese ecosystem.
Yeah, I will get to the issue of the comparisons and the relative advantages or disadvantages in a minute, but Anastasia, I absolutely want to bring you in here, because one thing that I really love about this report is the focus on practice, and the opening metaphor that you use is that of the boxer, that practice makes perfect, right? And it's very much a practice-based skill, and it's something that we see very much in China, is the absolute melding of theory and practice. It's of course an old Maoist idea. You absolutely need both. You can't just do the theory, you need the practice, and vice versa, and they inform each other. So on that note, Anastasia, I wondered if you could just talk a little bit about how can policymakers better promote the integration of this kind of, in the US, of course, better promote, or can they promote the integration of CTF, so capture the flag contests, into education curricula? Is this an aspect that we can and should carefully, I'm sure, be considering and copying, because naturally the systemic differences are huge. We want to be very careful about what doing. Describe for us what is being done right now already in the US in terms of developing these contests among students and educationally, and what can be done better.
Okay, so let's start off just talking about our workforce development programs in general. We've had fantastic workforce development programs dating back to the late 90s, right? We had CAEs, later SFS in the early 2000s. But over time, we've seen support both in resources and funding wane, and the programs really haven't been that consistent. And honestly, if we're taking a look at competitions, it's the exact same thing. We've seen a bunch of great competitions that come up, and they almost exist as pilots because they're one and done, and then it's on to the next. Another thing that I thought was really interesting in Dakota's report was his, just how much industry is contributing to these competitions. And I will say we have great industry participations in a lot of competitions. But again, as economic times kind of create turmoils for some of these companies, we see pocketbooks kind of restrict, and some of the support for these competitions disappears. And that ultimately has ripple effects for what these competitions are able to do. There's actually a really fantastic resource that was released more recently. It was released by the CAE community, and it's called the Cyber Atlas. And it does a really great job of documenting all of the competitions in the United States, and provides even the number of universities that are participating in these competitions. It is a new resource. I think that they need more data on which institutions are specifically competing in these competitions, but it's a really great start. And again, it's another resource that needs support, resources, funding in order to be relevant.
Right. Is there enough, do you think there's enough awareness about the need for this, and just how pressing it really is? Because throughout from what you see from your perch at CISA, because it's really something where we are behind, aren't we? We were previously ahead, if you like. We've fallen behind. This is something that Eugenio has talked about too with me, is we need to catch up. We need to kind of get with it, we need to get with the plan. We need to hurry. This is a necessary step, or do you think it's a necessary step then to, introduce these things more deeply, more broadly?
No, I completely agree. And actually, it was so funny because I contacted Dakota right in the middle of his research, because I actually found a paper that he wrote in 2021 on China's AI cyber talent pipeline. And in the report, it was fascinating how he was already talking about the need for us to start introducing more AI curriculum into our colleges and universities. And this is in 2021, right? And it wasn't until 2023 that Executive Order 14 110 was implemented that talked about the country's need, the United States need to safe, secure, and trustworthy development of and use of artificial intelligence. And then since then, we've seen a bunch of universities across the U.S. developing AI curriculum. So it's not, I would say, something that's just, particular to competitions alone, right? It spreads across different emerging technologies, as Jessica was talking about earlier. And I do agree. When we talk about competitions, there's been tons of empirical research over the last 20 years. I mean, competitions aren't new in the States. There's been so many different types of competitions in the States. There's been, CTFs, Jeopardy style, attack and defense, some really great competitions. Cyberforce is actually going on this weekend, hosted by the Department of Energy. That's a fantastic competition that focuses on critical infrastructure. There's the U.S. Cyber Games with Commissioner Jess Gulick. And actually, one of the things that she points out that I completely agree with, that is very akin to China, is just how much of an esports-like culture China has, right? I mean, these guys are rock stars. They will go and train in almost an esports-like fashion to compete on these cyber teams. And Jessica, God bless her, she's done a really great job of trying to promote an esports-like environment within the competition ecosystem as well. But again, this isn't something that I would say is just starting today. There's been a lot of really great thought leaders. Dan Manson, when I think about all the work that he's done in cybersecurity competitions, Jake Mihevik of the CAE and cybersecurity community competition, so many great people have tried to spur this ecosystem, and I actually think it's really starting to take shape. I think it's still kind of in the initial phases, but it is taking off here in the States. I really do see it. But again, it needs the resources, it needs the funding, it needs the support.
Right. But just for everyone's sake, could you CAE, could you fill that acronym
Centers
in?
of Academic Excellence in Cybersecurity.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I mean, I think this brings us to the point where, before we get to lots of great questions from listeners, I wonder if people could just briefly address, all of you, all four of you, the issue of what do you think we really need, what the US really needs to learn from this burgeoning, deepening landscape? We didn't talk about one thing that's actually very important, which I want to slip in there before we get to that, which is, I did it just at the back of the envelope calculation, and I think that the Ministry of Public Security, the Ministry of State Security, and the PLA alone seem to have hosted nearly 500,000 participations in their competitions, just those three ministries. Now, those are obviously ministries of great interest, but there are many, many other ministries too. So that's just something to kind of, maybe we can think about the real sort of security input into deep into the population in China, which we're seeing with this infrastructure. But to get to the issue of the US, because that speaks also to systemic issues, isn't it? Like, China is the way it is, got the Communist Party, they can plan meticulously and they can make people do what they want them to do, essentially. It's not like that in the US. It's not like that in Europe either. And how transferable, therefore, is this kind of system, remembering what Anastasia's been saying about how we already have many elements of it, but are there areas of emphasis that are simply being done better in China that we would struggle to do in public in the US or in Europe? Europe's actually important here. It's the Atlantic Council. We need to think about transatlantic issues. One of you, perhaps, Eugenio, do you want to start with an answer there? Or, sorry, Anastasia, I can see you. Perhaps you could go second. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm also happy to bring a European perspective and just start by saying that in Europe, it's just harder usually to talk about Europe as a single entity, in particular when it comes to these capabilities. If you consider the varying levels of cybersecurity maturity across different countries and the impact this has on different talent pipelines, countries maybe like the UK, Italy, Germany, Netherlands might have better pipelines than others, strong educational programs, and so on and so forth. Well, this of course creates disparity when talking about Europe or the European Union as a one entity. But this being said, I had the pleasure having a discussion with very recently, in view of this exchange, with Mario Polino, is the coach of the Italian national hacking team, as well as the coach of Team Europe at the International Cybersecurity Challenge that took place this week in Chile, where they won the first prize. So congrats to them. And it mentioned that while in Europe, these city apps are growing in complexity and size, they remain still quite niche, and their value remains underestimated. And it did stress the importance of these contests as mechanism to help evaluate talent objectively. So he says specifically says this is not about opinions, it's about pure facts. This competition really assess someone's performance. They help them develop their mindsets. You really learn how to learn as you perform. And they're also important knowledge transfer mechanism between writers of challenges and executioners. So sometimes the way participants can execution challenges can really as well teach something writers and to writers and vice versa. So point number one, I would say integration. So when looking at China's ecosystem, the difference with Europe. But I also had a chance to talk to actually Jessica Gulick as well, the founder and commissioner of US Cyber Games, just a few days ago. And she also, so I really admire her effort in really making this ecosystem so much stronger in the US. And in that discussion, something that was really emphasized was the need to really push more with attack defense formats, events in both across US and Europe to really improve our offensive capability talent pipeline.
Yeah, well, that's a really interesting point. Anastasia, would you like to continue there?
Yeah, just going on some of the things I said earlier, I think, funding and resources are a huge issue. I think if we want to continue to see a healthy ecosystem develop here in the States, we need to be putting money and resources towards it, both from the public and from the private sector as well. I think there have been just so many truly great competitions that have existed as a one and done. Done one year, gone the next. I think educators do a fantastic job of telling students about all the potential competitions that they're aware of. And I hope that new resource that I talked about earlier, Cyber Atlas, on the Centers of Academic Excellence Community or CAEcommunity.org website can actually show students where all of these competitions are. But I also know, too, that even when professors are telling students about these opportunities, they often aren't required in an academic setting, right? It's largely optional, seen as an added benefit rather than a must-do. Even when we in government and industry are telling these students, hey, do this to get a great cyber job, do this to build cyber skills. Again, we don't have a culture that supports competitions. I don't think, as well as China does. Again, these guys are rock stars. It's almost esports over there. And I don't think we also do a really great job of tracking and promoting competitions here in the States. And I also want to be really careful, too, when we're talking about just the sheer number of people that are participating in the Chinese competitions. I mean, they will beat us in numbers every time, right? There's a billion of them, versus how we're doing here, in the West or in the US, right? When you take a look at the International Cybersecurity Challenge that and SEO just talked about, they had 64 countries participate in the very first International Cybersecurity Challenge. That's fantastic. There was thousands and thousands of students across countries, right? We had participants in Africa, in Asia, countries like Japan, Malaysia, Australia, we had Latin America, so it's really, not just an isolated thing here in the States where these cyber ecosystems are really building, but again, in order to sustain them, they need that support.
Right. We're kind of pushing up to the time limit, and I want to get to the questions. So, but just very briefly, Devin and Dakota, is there anything you wanted to add on the issue of the transferability of the systems? With keeping in mind that one of the recommendations in the report is that we should sort of learn from this sort of very ambitious and energetic burgeoning system in China.
Yeah, if I may. I would say there are things that we should take away that are can be replicated in kind, but are wholly different than the way that China's system functions. I do think that situating these competitions is a way for students to have hands-on experience as part of the learning process, but also as part of the continuing education process for professionals who are already in the field. Is something that we have good systems in place for evaluating continuing education credits for professionals in the workplace, et cetera. We have a very robust system for interacting with universities across all 50 states and territories. But I think to Anastasia's point, the hard part of transferring kind of the key bits from the Chinese system to the US system is that they do sponsor and support participation in these competitions, especially among students. In the first year of university, 45% of students in a cybersecurity degree are taking part in a competition. And then in their sophomore year, an additional 32% are. So by the first 2 years of school in a cybersecurity program, 87% of students have participated in at least one hacking competition. And most schools are subsidizing their participation in those events. And so to Anastasia's point, the United States is very good about being able to set regulations, minimums, and requirements for compliance in a particular certification or degree field, or, for example, the Centers of Academic Excellence. They have requirements that they have to meet in their curriculum to be certified as such an institution. But when it comes to putting dollars behind those requirements, the U.S. is often not the first mover to do so. And so we have issues around the way that funding is thought about, how it's allocated, where it comes from originally, and how much we expect individuals to bear as a cost of participation in these programs.
Yeah. Can I just slip in before we get to Devin? Can I just slip in another question there, Dakota, which is in your research, did you come across clear connections between this activity, this landscape in China, and some of these cyber attacks that we're seeing, for example, in the US? Is it possible to draw a line there, or is this a little...
Yeah, so there are some instances in which
to
past reporting has indicated that, and our report
identify.
offers additional information here. There are some instances of circumstantial evidence where it does appear that competitions are related to offensive operations against targets. The hack of Anthem Insurance was conducted on infrastructure that was tied to a university hacking competition at Southeast University. Intrusion Truth, which is an anonymous blog, and so take it with a grain of salt, has connected APT 40 out of Hainan University with hacking competitions for recruitment, but not for operational purposes. And then our report also points to the Zhejiang Cup at Northwestern Polytechnical University, which has some accompanying circumstantial evidence that they may have participated in hacking an actual collection target. However, I've not seen any evidence that shows a direct through line between these hacking operations and hacking competitions. That said, if you ask people in the United States private sector who have been victimized by hacking operations coming out of China, a number of them will quietly tell you that they do track the IP addresses back to university campuses. And so while it may not be a kind of a structure or a formal feature of this competition ecosystem, it's just kind of baked in as a whole that universities in China, and to the extent maybe even some of these competitions do end up playing a role for the state.
And that's, of course, speaks directly to the whole of society approach. And, you're thinking of somewhere like Shanghai Jiaotong University, which has been linked to a lot of cyber attacks. And you're so right. It's like, when you say it, it's like one just remembers that so many of these reports about cyber attacks they go back to universities. So that's an interesting thought. Devin, I wondered if you would like to comment also on the issue of learning from China, the limits of it.
I think in the interest of just getting to other folks' questions, we can leave it,
Okay,
have
great.
thoughts, but
Thank you for that.
I think the main points have been covered.
All right, thank you. Appreciate that. All right, so more questions. I'll take them as they go. Do any of these competitions include submissions for 0-day vulnerabilities? Asks somebody called Anonymous. I don't know who would like to take that. Please just leap in, raise your hand, speak out.
I can cover that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just as mentioned at the beginning, just to differentiate between the different types of hacking competitions. So this report mostly looked at CTF, which are simulated challenges, whereas different kind of contests called exploit or live hacking contests target specifically real software products and systems. So with the goal to find zero-day vulnerabilities. It can be submitted to the vendor, patched, and then the researcher will get a monetary reward in exchange. So these are basically monetary incentives for researchers to find 0 days. Yes, in China, there are similar competition, in particular, the most popular being the Tianfu Cup that has taken place between 2018 and 2023. was supposed to take place this week technically, but we haven't seen it yet. But there's also another contest that is taking new one that is taking place this year called the Matrix Cup, and we know that it's likely that these contests, that the vulnerabilities that identify these contexts are submitted to or considered for offensive purposes by China's security agencies. We've seen in several reporting. We know there are existing processes in place. Dakota's 2023 Atlantic Council Report Sleight of Hand does the best job out there describing these processes. So yes, there are definitely cases. It is likely that that 0 days discovered in these contests are considered for offensive operations.
Oh, okay. Just to remind the audience, questions, askac.org. And we have some more questions here. Are there any unofficial black hat gathering and competitions around China that were intentionally set up for government exploitation?
Yeah, it's I would just look at the policy that was put out in 2018 that the government issued that kind of helped kind of formalize this ecosystem. And part of that, we've talked about the last clause a lot, which is to say that relevant government ministries are supposed to support the development of a hacking ecosystem. But, the third or fourth clause of that same policy document requires that vulnerabilities disclosed at or demonstrated at these competitions are collected by, quote, relevant organs. And so since 2018, we can imply that from these competitions, the state is collecting capabilities. There's really good research by the MIT Technology Review publication in 2021 about a vulnerability and exploit that went from Tianfu Cup one day to exploitation against Uyghur cell phones the next day. So, less than a 24-hour turnaround period. And that was a public competition. That was not like an off-the-record private event for the security services. That was something very public. And so I don't have, and we've not, self-censored any information that would be private about such events. Do they occur? I don't know, but I can tell you the public policy that is clear and is public makes these events tools for the state. And so I don't see any benefit to making them private or secretly held.
24 hours, that is very fast, isn't it? Okay. Next question. How exactly do these hacking exercises pose a threat to the defense industrial base? The questions from Carly Welch, Network and Digital Warfare Reporter at Breaking Defense. I'm not sure who would like to go for that one. Please leap in if you would. And let me know if I can read it out again, if you need that. That was how exactly do these hacking exercises, I think Carly means the contests pose a threat to the defense industrial base of the US. Carly, if you could, is that right? Or who'd like to take that one?
Oh, I can.
Yeah.
I mean, generally speaking, I think in the few instances where we're seeing a direct line between or likely direct line between offensive contests, hacking contests and offensive operation, in that case, there will be a direct connection. But I think here the focus is mostly on the development of a talent identification, development, and evaluation system that can be then fed into government agencies or private companies that are then leveraged by the state for offensive purposes. So I think this is the most the largest focus.
Anyone want to add to that? Devin, I wondered if I could just ask you something. Do you, from a kind of stepping away geopolitical perspective with other places in mind too, do you see anything of a similar nature? Where else in the world might we be coming across a system of a similar nature, if you like? And I'm thinking here of the clearly intimate ties between the public and the security services, the public activity, and then the 24-hour harnessing of these skills for domestic repression. Is there anywhere else it's done quite like this that you know of, for example?
I'll be honest, I focus very closely on China. The
Okay.
only other
Okay.
place that comes to mind, I'm not sure that it's anywhere near the same in terms of large scale competitions and, sort of systematic harvesting of cutting edge capabilities from that system. But Russia has obviously demonstrated a close connection between, the government, its security services, and the Black Hat community, even if maybe they aren't doing things exactly in this structured way that China has. That's what comes to mind for me. But to be honest, and from what I'm aware of, China may be unique in the scope and
Right.
scale of how it's sort of systematized this work.
Yeah, and innovative too. I mean, would anyone like to add to that in terms of any parallel? Anastasia, you aware of parallels anywhere else in the world?
No, I think I'd have to agree. I do so much. So my primary focus is in workforce development and training and education programs. And I think that, going back to what Devin said, like we've seen probably the biggest overtures in China. And then, Russia, it's kind of hard to get some information on some of the systems and programs that they have, but they do release press releases. They just had a great camp during their, cyber week. But yeah, those are the two I would say, but China being the primary one, especially as it relates to competitions.
I'm curious also about Iran, of course. I realize this is not the subject of the report, but maybe just to, note to self, what about there? So the next question, why would the talents from these competitions be willing to work for the Chinese government instead of seeking higher rewards almost anywhere else? Right. Money, is there the money available if you in China? What about the issue of leaving China? I believe actually you need to get permission to leave China to take part in overseas hacking contests now. Dakota, I think you mentioned that. So yeah, there's the money, and what about the talent
Yeah, I mean,
and how it moves? Why would
I
they take
think
the government issues things and not just go for the bucks?
we have that same question kind of in the United States system, at least, particularly when we talk about talent retention and training for some of the armed forces and their cyber talent capabilities, who they train and retain effectively. We get asked the same question, and individuals answer those for their own reasons. Most of the people that I know that work for the U.S. government and not in the private sector, they do earn less money. They do not get stock options, and they do it because they want to contribute to a mission set that is not generating shareholder value, and they value immensely participating in defending our democracy. And so their participation in those systems at, what are effectively in some cases below market salary and wages is entirely a decision they make out of a sense of loyalty, belonging, and patriotism to this country. And so to think that people in China do not make decisions for similar reasons would be a mistake.
What about the issue of people of the movement between China and say the US and in terms of hackers? What are the risks associated now? And there's a very, of people coming from China to take part in US hacking contests, for example. I believe there used to be quite a lot of that also in Canada. That I'd be curious about that. And also the other way around. In your report, Eugenio, you point to the fact that Americans and people from other nationalities have gone to China, been invited to China, even sometimes to participate. What's in it for China? What do they do there?
So I think to the extent that we're still talking about CTF competitions, I don't think participants or hackers participating in these simulated challenges poses necessarily a threat. I think the other Yeah, so to the extent that there is international exchange, when we talk about restrictions of Chinese hackers going to the US or to abroad in general, or specifically this regulation is for the most part applied to exploit contests. So again, when we have the release or the disclosure of 0 days that the Chinese government considers strategic assets that should be instead kept domestically. So again, here, that's also why I wanted to stress the difference between different types of contests at the beginning. I think it's something that we always have to keep in mind when we're talking about this issue, because it's the simulated versus real products not only indicates a different type of contest, but also different types of participants. At least in the Chinese case, CTF is usually been associated with elite universities and participants, whereas exploit, lab hacking, and real and 0 days vulnerabilities is usually seen the participation of tier 1 tech or cybersecurity companies. So starting from this differentiation, I think that it's easier to come to different conclusions.
And there is a final question here, which a little bit we've addressed already, I feel. It says, has China actively, or we've touched on, we perhaps didn't quite get the answers yet. Has China actively tried to prevent PRC citizens from participating externally in other foreign competitions, i.e., are they worried about loss of talent towards the US?
Yeah, so part of the 2018 competition notice that kind of sets up this ecosystem. We've talked about elsewhere, you know, the requiring of vulnerability collection by the state. Part of that does talk about having to apply kind of to leave the country. Those are, as Eugenio pointed out, kind of focused at vulnerability and exploit competitions. China is concerned about brain drain, right? Particularly when we look at STEM talent that can make a strategic impact over a long period of time, cybersecurity being one of those, but also AI talent and other forms of research. It should come as no surprise that smart people want to flee an authoritarian government. And so there is kind of a talent base who is both capable of getting a job overseas and interested in doing so. And unfortunately, the Chinese government is aware that they're not everyone's first choice for, you know, leadership. That said, it doesn't make it any easier for those individuals to travel overseas. You know, these opinions are often retained privately. They have no interest in criticizing or making clear that they don't like the government where they live. And the government has every incentive to try and keep these folks in place. That said, there are instances where the Chinese government does encourage participation and cooperation in overseas competitions. So for example, part of our dashboard includes the competition for cybricks. So this is cyber and the word bricks, you know, thrown together, where there's competition for the BRICS nations and those that are interested in, you know, peripheral, potentially joining BRICS countries as well. We've seen those competitions take place for the last 6 years or so. And then, you know, these prohibitions about traveling abroad for some of these competitions do make it interesting when individuals do travel abroad and they do participate in foreign competitions. That said, there is a competition we highlight in the written report. It goes out abroad under the name Geekpone and kind of attracts individuals to you know, participate in part of a competition. Part of it is a stand-up forum for talks about research, et cetera. Some of it has to do with vulnerability demonstration. And so we do see organizations that are interested in interacting with foreign organizations. But the cybricks is kind of the formal and premier version of interacting with foreign countries in this ecosystem, not for vulnerability or exploitation development, but specifically around CTFs, talent pipeline development, et cetera. We do also note in our paper that one of the sponsoring organizations for the cybricks and the related ex-CTF ecosystem is likely a cover organization for the MSS 12th Bureau, which is responsible for foreign elite influence operations, right? And so it's very interesting that you find kind of this overlap between part of the bureaucracy that has a responsibility for engaging with the outside world and part of the competition ecosystem whose role is also to engage with the outside world. And so there are very specific and measurable ways in which these ecosystems are allowed to interact with one another. And I think those are all prescribed by policies that have been made very public.
Yeah, wow. I mean, and we are out of time. In fact, we're 2 minutes beyond the end. And I see I'm supposed to make closing remarks for 5 minutes, but I'm not going to do that because I don't want to delay people. Just, really very fascinating, very, very critical, this topic, very urgent, I think. And so thank you very, very much to everyone for your thoughts that you've shared so eloquently here, and to, of course, to Melanie at the Atlantic Council, and to CISA, our two contributors from CISA, Anastasia and Jess. I think looking at it overall, I suppose one thing you just said at the end there, Dakota, cybricks. So that would be cyber bricks. And of course, we're looking at bricks as a kind of a burgeoning different system. And we're almost looking at a kind of a challenge, a parallel system that who knows where it will go. Is it coherent? What institutions does it have? But when it comes to cyber, it's very interesting that they've got something called cybricks. So there we go. It's really a architecture that's growing in all ways. And I think all the more reason, there's a lot of analysis, a lot of information gathering to do. And above all, I also get the impression, just to, sorry, 21, it's 19. I was going to just speak for 2 minutes, 30 seconds more. The perseverance and the continuity, that's what's missing, really, isn't it, in a way, in democracies. We're governed by these election cycles, and people kind of lose focus. We lose focus quite a bit. And that's not a new observation. We all know that China works differently. But I guess as awareness grows of the scale and the nature of the challenge and the sheer ability and the innovation and the speed that China moves at in this area too, perhaps that's something that people will start to look at in a more granular level and actually put more money into it, and more long-lasting money, more, with greater time frames looking forward. So thank you very, very much again. Sorry to keep you a little longer, and fantastic discussion. Thanks so much for the report. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.